provide lots of different opportunities for practices to get information in lots of different ways. Just going back to the previous slide, I want to talk through some of the resources, especially as many of you that are officially part of the model and you as conveners who are going to be getting access to a lot of this information. Ooh, the slides are just getting all over the place. I'm going to try to move us back. There we go. You're going to have access to all of this information as well. Lisa, I'm trying to get back to the resources slide 6, and not cooperating.
So we can, why don't I stop sharing for a second and I'll move it? That's okay.
Maybe you should take that on. So while Lisa's moving us back to those slides, just to talk a little bit more about some of those resources. So many of you have probably had an opportunity to look at, but if you haven't, one of the great resources that we have available to practices is what we call our implementation guide. And that really is a reference to not only the care delivery model, but a lot of the guidelines for practice reporting, for information and access to the portal, CPC Plus Connect. So it's just a great reference for practices, but not just practices, for everyone who's part of the model. If you have questions about what's happening and the requirements around the care delivery aspect of the model, if you're looking for information on, again, the reporting requirements, we've heard from practice facilitators that they use this document all the time when they're working and going into direct coaching with practices to help pull that information out for them and direct them to the particular areas that they have questions about. The change package, as many of you know, it's very similar to the change package that was part of Classic, but we've certainly integrated all of the new aspects of the CPC Plus model, and that really does provide kind of that snapshot, of the overall CPC Plus model. It takes a little bit of a deeper dive into the aspects of the logic model. So it describes the various drivers, the primary care functions, and then within those primary care functions, it goes into those change concepts and those high impact change tactics. So if you really want to look and understand what is included as part of the CPC Plus care delivery model, the change package, you might want to just grab that. And then we have our CPC spotlights. And again, this was another thing that was part of Classic that we are building out now in CPC Plus. It's a great opportunity for those practices who want to grab just a quick snippet of information to learn about how a particular practice or how a practice implemented a particular high impact change tactic, how they're making improvements. And so we try to highlight some of the data that they are able to share in that, walk through, just some of the very specific steps that they took that practices can glean from. And we really try to, when we take these spotlights, and highlight these practices that are part of the spotlights, information that truly can be translated across any type of practice and regardless of the region that they're in. So it really should be applicable to all practices in the model. So Lisa, let's go on to the next slide. So as we work through again, trying to provide learning in lots of different ways, at lots of different times and opportunities for those who are engaged and participating in the model, we have divvied it out into different types of groups. So we have our national webinars, and the national webinars are usually an hour long. The idea of providing information in a national webinar is information that's really timely and relevant to all individuals who are participating in CPC Plus model. So we always invite everyone to attend national webinars, payers, conveners, practices, anyone part of the practice. We really want all comers to those national webinars, usually very critical and pertinent information. It also usually is information that takes at least an hour to present. Depending on the topic, we might invite a couple practices to talk and make it more relatable about if it's a care delivery function, primary care function, how did they execute one aspect of it? So it's a little more of a didactic, but we do provide an opportunity to bring in questions from all participants as part of those. For information that we just want to provide a smaller snippet, some, information that practices can grab when they need it. We have put together some of this information as what we call on-demand webinars. So those are usually not more than 10 minutes. We do some whiteboarding and some visual effects that make the information a little more dynamic, but it's usually a smaller amount of information that's delivered in terms of the content, and it, kind of a tight little presentation. So it's not an opportunity where we can have that ongoing dialogue back and forth with practices on those. It's just a smaller amount of information that we want to deliver and make available to practices. So we are also offering what we call action groups. And again, that might sound familiar to those of you that were part of CPC Classic. The action groups are really set up to guide practices through a particular improvement that they're making. The action groups last 6 weeks. It's a combination of 3 live sessions, so 1-hour live sessions around that topic. It combines with some pre-work. The practices are expected to do some small tests of change and improvement in between sessions. And then we also combine that with an opportunity to share resources and have practices ask questions throughout the 6-week time period on Connect. We have dedicated groups for each action group on Connect. I'll show you a little bit more about that later. But it really is, again, an opportunity for practices to interact with practices that are across regions. The information is really intended to help practices achieve those care delivery requirements. And we've had some great success on those with the engagement of practices. I'm sure you've had similar engagement on your meetings here with Lisa and all of you together. The chat is just, we have one dedicated faculty just monitoring chat because we get so many comments and questions and conversation happening there, in addition to the speakers and the practices that are such a key part of, and our subject matter experts that are part of those action groups. So we've had some great information shared there. Our affinity groups are specific to a particular EHR. So we have set up affinity groups for practices that are part of Track 2 to regularly engage with their EHR vendors. So as you know, in CPC Plus, for Track 2 practices, they had that agreement to work actively with their EHR vendors to develop the infrastructure, the health IT, technology and support that they need to really deliver care in a more advanced fashion than what's expected of the Track 1 practices. Now, we also have opportunity for Track 1 practices to come together and collaborate around issues that they're trying to overcome, or challenges they're facing, or solutions that they've identified in working with their particular EHR. So there's a lot of activity that's going on across all those various groups. So if you have a particular interest and want to participate in one of these affinity groups, that's something that we can explore with you as well. We are we have some rules in place to make sure that the information and that's shared amongst the practices and the vendors is respectful of that confidentiality and some of that space, so that we only have practices that are using that particular platform, that EHR technology, as part of those groups. So they're not completely open to everyone. But again, I'll show you a little bit more on CPC Plus Connect and talk about some opportunities for you guys to engage there as well. And then, of course, everyone looks forward to the annual national meeting. There's just nothing that can replace that in-person interaction. So go ahead and mark your calendars. We do have the date set. It is May 8th, 2018. It's going to be in Baltimore at the Convention Center. We're hoping that we're going to have a really good turnout there. It's going to be, I think, an opportunity for some of the practices who haven't been able to, attend some of their in-person regional events, but for those who even are going to the regional events, to really interface and interact with individuals from other regions across the CPC Plus community. So we're really excited about that. We're just going into the planning for that. So more information to come soon. And then just to give you a little bit of a glimpse. So, as I carved out and walked you through all the various types of learning, you'll see that there's a lot. There's a lot of different opportunities for practices to engage in lots of different places. And we certainly don't expect everyone to plug in and take advantage of every single opportunity that's afforded them. We really wanted to create a learning curriculum across national and regional that provided flexibility for practices. Again, even though we have dedicated what we call on-demand webinars, all of our learning events are recorded, available for viewing on YouTube. So all that information is always made available. But again, we know that practices come into this at lots of different points in time. We know that different individuals learn in different ways. And so we want to present as many opportunities as we can. So again, you'll see that we're providing, these capability and collaboration affinity groups around the various EHRs. We're providing these action groups. The one here, our most recent one we just launched on Wednesday was addressing social needs in primary care and linking to community services. Right now we have 6 active action groups running, so all simultaneously. So again, and that's in addition to a lot of the regional events that are going on. So I think, what's important to note is that, we're always working to make improvements in this model. We try to present this in a way that's not overwhelming to practices, but really, again, provides them as much flexibility and support as they need when they need it. So in addition to those actual learning events, we have some additional resources that we make available to the practices. Everyone is part of the model, not just the practices. So I'm guessing that all of you now, or most of you, many of you on the call that are officially integrated into the model are receiving our newsletter called On the Plus Side. This is where we really try to give the most timely, pertinent information to the practices on a weekly basis. It comes out every Tuesday afternoon. Well, depending on where you're at in the country, the Hawaii practices and West Coast get it in the morning. So we provide updates to upcoming learning events there, registration links, both national and regional. Really all of the various contractors that are part of the CPC Plus model can include any relevant information that they need to disseminate out to the practices there. There's always that challenge and struggle with getting the right information to practices at the right time in a way that they'll be able to absorb it and glean what they can from it. So we try to balance, not putting too much information into this particular newsletter with also not sending them a bunch of additional emails and communications, because we know it's a lot for the practices to balance and to get through, because it's a very dynamic program and we're changing things up a lot of the times as we go and providing new opportunities for the practices to learn and to collaborate. Our FAQs are distributed to practices through the newsletter, but they're also a standalone document that's available up on CPC Plus Connect. Depending on a particular issue that might be relevant at the time, we might focus our FAQ on that. If we just delivered a national webinar on a particular topic and there were several questions that we might not have been able to get to as part of that dissemination, we'll include some of the answers in the CPC Plus FAQs. We also try to take those questions that truly are being frequently asked on the Connect platform and through support to really understand that, if several practices are asking this question, there's many more who haven't actually gone in and typed in the question, but they have the same inquiries as well. So we try to present that information in a way that will be most helpful to practices. We're also including all of those as an active searchable, what we call a knowledge tab in CPC Plus Connect, which is new. And we're hoping that the practices are going to start to take better advantage of that as well. And now that I've referenced CPC Plus Connect here quite a bit, I'll go into a little bit more description about what's all included there. So we can go over to the next slide and talk a little bit more about that. So we have all of our information, all of our links to our learning events, slides from learning events, both regional and national, national webinars, affinity groups, action groups, regional virtual learning. Everything goes up on CPC Plus Connect. The other thing that's really cool about this is the ability of the practices to really engage with one another. as I mentioned, there's some practices who get their learning from documents. There's some who get it through in-person learning events. And there are a very strong committed cohort that know that they get all their questions answered and do all their sharing on CPC Plus Connect. As one of the faculty that responds to questions and provides answers there and resources, I recognize now most of the names of the individuals who interact on this platform. So it's not for everybody. We're certainly always trying to find other avenues to get and drive people to come to CPC Plus Connect, because it is such an incredible resource to everyone. But we do understand and appreciate that that's not the environment that everyone's most comfortable with. But again, I really do encourage you to participate there. Now, we as the national faculty, we monitor every business day, have a faculty with expertise in the model and in primary care, monitoring and responding to questions, inquiries that come in on what we call the CPC Plus All Chatter. So it's not technically the default group, but once you are a part of CPC Plus Connect, everyone gets access to the all chatter. So that's kind of the generic group that if you post to that group, everyone gets that communication, can see it, see the post there. So our goal is to always provide responses to practices there within 24 hours. Now, sometimes we need to do a little bit more research. We need to go back to our partners at CMS and ask for some clarification around a question that came in. It might be something that hadn't been asked before, or might be information that they're seeking that we haven't really had a chance to discuss before, or some really unique care delivery challenge that they've run into that we hadn't heard of before. So we work closely with our CMS partners to get more clarification and answers to those questions, which we then go back and post into that feed. Then there's lots of different groups. You'll see here the all payers group. And if you haven't already joined that, we'll certainly encourage you to do so. We as faculty do not provide responses and monitor every single group in there. So the all payers group, you'll recognize Rava's name in there. And she's mostly the one who's monitoring and providing information and resources on there. We certainly support a lot of the learning activities that go out to the payers, but that's one area. And it is restricted to those individuals who are payers and for those of you who are as conveners and part of this group. So it's not a place where practices have access to. Practices are not watching your conversation there. So many of those practices, like I mentioned, some of the affinity groups and other groups are really restricted in terms of their membership. We want to make sure that it is also a safe place where individuals from different parts of the model can have some really open, honest communication and ask their pertinent questions. You'll see some other groups, the regional groups. So every region has their own group on Connect, and the regional faculty, and again, you'll learn more about the support that they're providing out to practices in the regions. They monitor those groups and respond to practices' questions there. And then we have several groups where regional and national faculty can communicate with one another. We really understand and appreciate how important it is for us to all work closely together and be in alignment in terms of how we're messaging things to practices, the information that we're sharing, the answers to questions, that we're as consistent as we can possibly be across all of this work. So we're always working to try to improve our processes around that to make sure that the practices are not ever or minimally confused at any given time, really providing them the most accurate information. So on the next slide, for those of you who have not already requested access to CPC Plus Connect, here's the link you can go to. It's a self kind of registration site. You do have to fill out a little bit of a form, a registration form, and once you submit that request, depending again on where you are in your engagement with CPC Plus model, once that is approved or if it's declined for a particular reason, you'll get information about next steps. So again, we really do encourage you to participate there. And again, you'll have access to all the resources that the practices have access to, all the documents in the library. So as just kind of a bit of a wrap up on the last slide, you know, one of the things that we're constantly working toward is, again, that synergy across all of the various partners that are part of the CPC Plus model. It's particularly important for us as a national learning community to work closely with the regional community. We truly value all the feedback that we get from our practices in terms of what is working as it relates to the learning opportunities, what do they like about what we're providing, what do they not like, and even as regional and national faculty attending each other's events, we have engaged in many conversations about where there's some opportunities for improvement. One of the things that we're currently working on, so you'll see some changes coming down in terms of what the learning looks like, are where can we as a national team seize more opportunities to provide that didactic content or highlight practices that are doing work that can be translated across any market, any region, any type of practice. So where we can really highlight those and share information, especially around the policy and care delivery requirements. If we can deliver that at a national level, then we think that we can free up the regional learning events to provide more direct support to those practices, more engagement to really help customize the learning that they need, that's important for their region, that's impacting their region, that is different, that we can't address on a national level, provide more opportunity for some real active engagement with the practices in those regions with their regional facilitators, more interactive. Again, there's just some things that you can do in an in-person event that you can't do even on a cool Zoom platform where you can do chat and talk and have some real-time conversation. Again, the in-person working and learning is a unique aspect that the regional team has, and we want to make sure that they can take full advantage of that. So with our final wrap-up slide, you know, again, all these things that we mentioned, there is also a support line for CPC Plus. It is a separate contract that Telligent runs the support line, but you can email at cpcplus@telligent.com to get your inquiry to the help desk, and they'll provide you a response, or there's a toll-free number that practices or any individual can call and ask their question. Again, lots of different places where practices can get the information that they need, whether it's through the help desk or whether it's through CPC Plus Connect or whether it's asking a question on a live event. We just try to provide as many avenues for practices to get the information they need. And then, of course, for those practices, they have access to their regional practice facilitators as well to get more targeted information about things that are unique to their practice or unique to their region. So with that, I think we've got some now time for some Q&A, Lisa.
That's great, Amy. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to leave this slide up here for now for a little while because it's got some key information and some numbers. Thank you very much for a wonderful description of the learning community. Leah and Hendrik, I just want to make sure that you don't have any final words you want to just share with the group right now before we launch into the Q&A. Okay. I think we're all set for now. There weren't too many questions on the chat function, but there was one to start from our colleague Jack Summers out in Tulsa. Jack, do you want to speak up and maybe we can get that conversation started?
Thank you, Lisa. During CPC Classic, in Oklahoma, we really thought we did pretty well, and I think that our outcomes bore that out. We're the only region that had shared savings all 4 years of the program, as well as increasing quality. But it seems like with the Starter Plus, they've really clamped down and have basically prevented us from doing many of the things that we were doing that made us successful in Classic. And they're even micromanaging to the point of, mandating titles to some of the programs, like the payers were supposed to give a presentation. They mandated a certain title to the program. So I think that that's an element of micromanagement that really doesn't belong in the program. Can you give us some relief from that type of style?
Hi, Jack. This is Leah Hendrick. Thanks for your question and comment. I guess the first thing that I would say is with CPC Plus, this is the new model. It's a much larger model, and so we certainly have some areas of learning to do in terms of how to run a model of this size and scope. So, in CPC Classic, which I also led for the last year or so of the initiative, it was a much sort of smaller and hands-on approach. And now with nearly 3,000 practices, we really have to think about how we can run this similar model at scale. And so we certainly have some growing pains that we're going through. And so your feedback is always really welcome so that we can understand how things are working on the ground in all of the regions. I will say that, I see your comment here chatted in, and one thing that I do want to point out is that we have sort of regional management calls where the regional learning contractor, the national learning contractor, the CMS region lead, and the practice facilitators in the region come together on a monthly basis to discuss progress in the region and to plan learning sessions in the region. And just this month, we're starting to incorporate the payers in the region into those calls as well to really give payers a greater voice, the payers in each region a greater voice and more sort of input into how we plan and manage the regional events. So I think we're certainly working to try to address some of the concerns that you're raising, but like I said, it's a process, and we're having some growing pains, and but we're definitely open to hearing this feedback and taking it into consideration as we move forward in the model.
Jack, does that help address your question?
That's a good question. I don't think entirely. I think that in Oklahoma, we have, all of the payers here have a degree of cynicism for the collaboration that may possibly achieve in the program. Through 4 years of Classic, we never really achieved collaboration with CMS. That was one of the stated goals, that the program would be a collaboration between CMS or CMMI and the local payers. When you talk to CMS, their version of collaboration was essentially cooperation. This is what we're doing. You can come along with us, but you really can't have any input. Whenever we try to offer input, what we're basically told is we'll take that up to higher levels, and then it dies. Again, what we're doing works. I really don't understand. And when you have a program where you're the only region that has consistent success, and no one comes and talks to you about it, why were you successful? It really starts to boggle the mind. So I guess I heard her answer, and I'm hopeful but somewhat cynical because I haven't seen that kind of response yet.
Thanks, Jack. I think it is, as Leah said, it is a process, and I think that you have great reason to feel very proud of the work that's been done very successfully in Tulsa. And I've heard also a little bit about people feeling that, especially payers who really do know their practices quite well, wanting to have more direct sort of contributions to the way the regional events happen and some of the curriculum. And as Amy mentioned, the heterogeneity of where the practices are in terms of their readiness and it's newer to the process, much more experienced. I mean, you can really have a pretty wide range, and sort of pitching it right is something that I think the regional learning faculty are open to getting some input from, and I think that process has started. I do think that's been heard, but it does take some time.
Lisa, if you don't mind me just interjecting for a minute, not completely, hopefully not a total non sequitur, but one of the things as a national team that we've been really excited about collaborating with the payers on is when we're looking to identify these practices for spotlights and for to showcase the great work that they're doing on action groups or affinity groups. We've been working with some of the payers in a few of the regions because, to your point, Lisa, a lot of you know these practices really well. You know the great work that they're doing. So I would really encourage you to share that information with us so that we can elevate the great work that they're doing, really promote that at a national level in any way that we can. I mean, we're truly always looking for practices who are willing to, and we know and appreciate that it does take time out of their practice day to do this, but we really appreciate any sharing of those bright spots that you can, and not to say that they even need to be doing everything perfectly, because we know every practice is on this journey of improvement, and especially in a lot of the venues that we provide these opportunities for practices to come. You know, it's actually in some ways works better when the practices say, you know, these are the things that we've done out, these are the things that have worked well, but we know we still have a ways to go, and that they are also learning on these events along with the other practices who are taking more of a participant role and not a speaking role. And that's really the gold star. You know, when we find that our practices who come on and speak tell us that they learned something from another practice, that a comment that came in the chat, we really feel like we hit a win, because we're bringing them on to not just be the teachers, but to also be the learners. We do rely more heavily on those practices who were part of CPC Classic, because we know they've been doing this work for longer. So that's why you'll see a lot of our spotlights focus more on those regions that were part of CPC Classic. Not to say that in the new markets there isn't a lot of amazing work that's going on, because there absolutely is, but because a lot of the practice facilitators have those relationships with those practices, those are more likely to be the ones that come forward for us. But again, knowing that even in those new regions, the payers oftentimes know these practices very well too. So we would really appreciate any recommendations that you could send forward to our team. You can send them directly to me or through Connect, making those suggestions. We actually have a form on Connect where you can nominate practices. It's geared as a practice self-nomination form, but for any of you on the line that want to nominate a practice, I'd encourage you to fill that out. And Lisa, I can share that out with you at the end of this session if you want to send it to everyone as well, because again, that's an area that we're always searching for. Because we know there's way more great things going on in practices than we at the national level are aware of on a daily basis.
Thanks so much, Amy. I wonder, this is Lisa again, I wonder if there would be a role for making that a little more formalized, some sort of a regular request that comes from, I guess it would be from the National Learning Faculty to the payers, you know, sort of checking in with them specifically and eliciting some of that information from them.
Yeah, I you know, Leah and Reba, we can work together to figure out what the best avenue to make that happen would be. But we would love to create a funnel to get that information on a regular basis. Oftentimes, depending on the particular event that's coming up, we're looking for practices that are highly engaged in one particular aspect of care. So I'll put it out there right now. We're still looking for more practices that have really jumped onto this innovation around alternative visits. So if you know of practices that are providing visits in a way that's beyond the traditional fee-for-service, you know, practitioner to patient in the exam room, whether it's group visits where it's telephonic or e-visits, we're looking for more practices who can talk about that, especially those who are taking advantage of the CPCP dollars to do that. So certainly would love to hear from you on that front. We're also looking for more practices who are starting to really help intentionally screening for and addressing unmet social needs with patients in their practice. Again, that's a new area in CPC Plus. So we're kind of having a hard time finding practices, even though there's a lot of practices who are doing this screening. They don't feel that they're at the place yet because it's so new to them that they want to be on a live presentation talking about how they're doing it, because they feel like they still have more questions than answers on that front. But those are two areas that I know in particular. Also, behavioral health, we've got those action groups going on now, focusing one on the care management for mental illness model and one on the primary care behaviorist model. So we're trying to engage more practices, showcasing the work they're doing in those discrete models. So yeah, we can certainly work with you guys to create a pathway to get those practice nominations in a more regular fashion, because even if we don't need them on an event tomorrow, which is good because we wouldn't want to ask a practice to come to an event tomorrow if we were really in a tight spot. But looking into the future, whenever we get a nomination about a practice, we track that information, we keep a log of it, and we as faculty constantly reference back to it and look into the future. What do we have coming up? Where can we plug in practices? We also try to be really respectful of practices' time and not invite them to multiple events. So, if they've already participated in a regional event and a national event, unless the practice comes to us and says they really want to talk more about another aspect of care, we try not to go back to the same practices all the time, as much as possible. And it is challenging, especially a lot of the practices in Oklahoma. I know I've got a few go-to people there that, it's like, it's so hard for me not to reach out to them because they're doing such amazing work across so many aspects of the model. So those are some of the things that we try to build into our process as well.
Thank you, Amy. I want to open it up a little bit to ask a question of some of the folks who are on the phone about their perceptions of how practices are seeing these opportunities. I think that there's a sense of that they're rolling up their sleeves and working hard. But if people have heard back from them, either payers or conveners who are on the line, from the practices feeling that that these resources are both readily accessible and helpful to them. So John Blair, I think, is on the line, and I'm working with the Hudson Valley region in New York State. John, do you have any sense of that? I know you've been hard at work there. I just unmuted you. We'll see if that works. Nope. Okay. So one of the, this is Lisa still, one of the other questions I wanted to talk about a little bit was around the CPC Plus Connect. There had been some restrictions in terms of who was able to log into that, and that has been gradually increasing to a wider circle of individuals and roles. For example, in Michigan, the provider organizations, which really provide a great deal of structure to the practices that are part of their larger tent organizations, are now able to get into the CPC Plus Connect world and really take advantage of that. And if there's any other sort of mechanism for getting multiple stakeholders who really could potentially benefit from seeing the conversation and the resources back and forth. I don't know, Amy, if you want to grab that question and just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Again, there's lots of different places to plug into the conversations that are going on in CPC Plus Connect. Certainly the places that you'd want to, I would say, prioritize would be the payer group, would be your regional groups, to make sure that you're part of the communication that is being shared there with your regional practice facilitators. That's where they also share information about upcoming learning events, and then also, registration links, those kinds of things, which are important for you to have access to. Again, we have lots of different types of learning events. We're also looking to create more specific groups around particular types of clinicians. So we have a group for care managers, we have a group for behaviorists. We can potentially expand the number of groups to accommodate the needs of practices and other partners that are part of the model. So, you can always send in those kinds of requests like, oh, wouldn't it be great to have a group on this? Where we're challenged is for individuals who post to what we call the CPC Plus All Chatter, it goes to everyone. And there's a lot of value in having a lot of different kinds of conversations and questions being asked in that one place. So people know that they can kind of understand what some of the most pertinent issues are by going there. The conversations tend to get more diffuse when we start to relegate them to other communities, other groups. So we're always trying to strike this balance. You know, when we see a comment or a resource being shared in the all chatter around, let's say, starting a patient and family advisory council, we also tag the action group that's part of that, because there are so many resources that have been posted in that. We want to make sure that it's all connected. So as you start to go on to Connect and you start to kind of figure out how the platform works, some helpful tips are also to, you have the ability to tag conversations around a particular topic. So then when you go and back and do that search, it'll come up, you know, if you're talking about risk stratification, you can tag it for risk stratification so that when you search for that chatter feed will also come up as part of your search, not just the resources connected to that. You can tag individuals within your post. So, you know, when we as faculty go in and we're responding to a question, obviously the question is posted in a public venue, but then we also, by tagging an individual, they get a special alert to their email box to let them know that their question was answered or that a comment was posted based on the information that they were providing there. Or you can like comments. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between like a Facebook kind of platform, but much more breadth and depth in terms of flexibility and different areas that you can carve out depending on your particular area of interest. It can be overwhelming. There's a lot of different conversations going on at different times. So you might want to take on just a few groups when you initially come on. There's also, as I mentioned, that knowledge tab. If you click a particular question into there, that gives you access to all the previously frequently asked questions and that information. So instead of having to go back and look at each individual document, you can type in your question there, and those answers will come up as well. And of course, the library, a huge resource, includes not only those documents that have been developed by CMS or by the other partners, but also the individual practices who are sharing information and documents and templates there go into that library. So an incredible resource for everyone who's a part of the model to not only get the information that they're looking for, but not to have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, that's the other big thing that we push, you know, it's like, if we can share something that one practice developed and save the time on that side for another practice, that's absolutely a goal of ours. So there's been some very generous sharing by practices up in the library as well.
Thank you, Amy. I have a couple of questions that came from Edith Stowe, who's the convener in Montana. They're sort of big picture questions, and they're open for you as well as for the team in Baltimore. The first is, what are the top issues that practices are worrying about that come up over and over again nationally?
So some of it depends on the timing. So we certainly see when it's reporting time, almost all the questions coming in to Connect are how do they complete their reporting? You know, the little nuances of particular type of patient or an issue that they've encountered. They're not sure where to plug that information into their reporting. So when quarterly reporting is open, that's where we get most of the questions. We just released CMS's financial reporting guidelines. So now we're seeing more questions along that. There had been a lot of questions, and so this is a great resource now that practices are taking advantage of, knowing that they're going to have to, at the end of the year, reporting on how they expended their dollars for the program. And then going into next year, we'll have to be forecasting their expenditures and revenue. So we've seen a lot of questions about that. You know, a couple areas that we think that the practices are just starting to kind of wrap their heads around and dabble in is the use of the CPCP dollars. You know, depending on the type of the practice, where they're at in the model, whether they're a smaller practice or a health system, you know, I think those dollars are being utilized in different ways. We do have an action group that's going to be kicking off specific to talking about the non-traditional office visits and the use of CPCP dollars. That starts on, and I'm going to tell you the date, it starts on August 8th is our first session for that one. So we're alerting practices and getting some additional communication out that that'll be a great venue for them to go and learn more about that and to have those conversations. You know, a lot of it is, it's a big shift for practices to really rethink about how they're not only providing care for their patients, but also how they account for that, how they budget for it, how they document for it. So if they're not having to plug into the traditional documentation requirements for a fee-for-service visit, what are some other ways that they can document that and put it into part of the patient record, but also not having as great an administrative burden as they might have if they were billing for the service. So a lot of questions like that from practices that I think they're just starting to explore.
Great, thank you. And that actually was the second question that Edith had, was specifically about the CPCP. And the third question, and I think maybe our final one as we're moving towards the end of this time, is asking about the care manager action group. And so what kinds of things are they truly talking about and perhaps taking action to address? And I guess there's a specific question about whether the actual people who are performing the care management activities are logging into the CPC Plus Connect platform, and then what you would hope that might come out of a group like that. Like, would there be something like standard job descriptions that could be shared amongst the many different organizations nationally?
Yeah, and they are sharing information just like that. We see on I don't know what the breakdown is on Connect in terms of the number of, or the percentage of care managers that are there, but we know on our live events, most of our action groups, we have across the board average about 30% of our attendees are the care managers. So they are front and center in this model, and they are really the ones who are, for the most part, participating in this model. We have seen, especially in some of the larger health systems, they might assign one particular point person who's kind of the CPC Plus lead to attend a lot of these learning sessions, and then they'll disseminate the information out to their care managers. So they might not be actively participating in the live version, but the information is still getting to them in some form or fashion. So that we've seen some variation there. But certainly depending on the topic, you know, we've had several action groups, and we started early on, kicked off our action groups around longitudinal and episodic care management, and have had several action groups on those. Certainly those have been very attractive to the care managers. Most recently, we just wrapped up our team-based care action group that we had a lot of participation from care managers on as well. But absolutely, they're sharing resources like job descriptions. We talk a lot about, you know, how many care managers do you need for a particular patient population? For how many high-risk patients are they seeing? What are the credentials of care managers? You know, sharing a lot of that more kind of nuts and bolts information on our various learning activities as well. The regional team, we know, is also planning to have a dedicated smaller group of care managers that they're going to be working with, some cross-regional collaboration groups. So there's going to be some additional opportunities for care managers on the regional side as well. So yeah, we're working really closely with them. We're also talking with regional about how during especially their in-person sessions, that they can provide some more targeted skill building that's specific for the care managers, and trying to create some curriculum that'll really help to build their capacity and their skill set. So yeah, so they're definitely one of our primary audiences there.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any other questions that didn't make it into the chat function? Anyone want to ask one last question of Amy or Leah today? Well, I want to thank everybody for participating in this, and this is a very exciting moment. I'd like to point out that we have, in addition to our obviously the CPC Plus regions that are participating in round one, we have a fair number of people from the round two regions, including Nebraska, North Dakota, and Louisiana. So I'm delighted to welcome you to these webinars, and I'm sure it must look a little daunting as you start from the very beginning, but it's very exciting. We're really delighted to have our round two participants with us. So I want to very deeply thank Amy Gibson and Leah Hendrick for providing this wonderful presentation for us today. This webinar was recorded. We will be putting it on our website. And if there's further information that people would like, please just contact me, and we can see if we can connect you with the right people around this webinar. And obviously you have all the connection information that's on this last slide, the question and answer. There is one more question actually just came up. Amy, if I could quickly ask you.
Sure.
A reminder, Janice was asking if how to refer in practices who are doing alternative visits, and I'm not actually sure exactly.
You know what? Let me chat to everyone. If you want to just send them directly to me, that would be fantastic. I would love to hear from you, and then I will also share with you that that document. And again, we can continue to talk about the process that we might be able to create that pipeline to get a continuous feed of suggestions of practices that we could highlight on upcoming events. That'd be great. But yeah, if you have practices who you think would be great to share the work they're doing on alternative visits, that'd be fantastic. If you could just email those directly to me, I'd love you.
So Amy has very quickly put her email into the Zoom group chat, and we'll follow up with a quick email from the fund later this week to provide that contact information as well. Amy and Leah, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone on the call. Just a reminder, there will be no webinar in the month of August through the Millbank Memorial Fund. We will reconvene in September. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.